Okay, in this step we want to find a solution to set a position of character related to the red cube. For example, we have to understand where is exactly the position of this character in this blue cube on our ground. So I made a lot of triggers and put it somewhere like this. They are the trigger to understand, okay, if the character is inside of this trigger, the trigger said, okay, I am trigger 5 and my the character and the black character is inside of my position. So it will be something like this. So for example, right now this trigger will say, okay, the character is inside of my position. And also for the user 2 we have the same system. So in fact the trigger 1 and in this user computer with trigger 1 in the user 2 are in the same position. So as you can see, the position of cube and 000 reference of unity, it doesn't matter. The important thing is the position of triggers, and if the user's black character is inside of the trigger 1, it says black character is in my position. So we have the trigger methods like here for both users. So we want to implement a trigger manager to say, okay, character is inside of me. So let's create a C# script, and we say pose trigger system. Okay. In here we have to define a variable internal int id. It will be the ID of this trigger. So we need to have on trigger inter, we call it obj, and we say, okay, let's write the name of obj as in the print in the console. Print obj.transform.name. When something enter to this trigger, it will write the name of it. Okay. Wait for the compiling. Alright. We don't need to have these ones. Right. And let's go to the here and click all of them and add this post trigger system to all of them. Okay, now they are available. Make sure that for all of them a box collider or another colliders needs to be is trigger. Okay, and also in here for our character, oh, it's better to say okay, what is my name, game object dot name plus says that object and is here. Okay. It is beautiful sentence. Okay, right now, for example, it is trigger 1, trigger 2, trigger 3, trigger 4 until trigger 5. Okay, and right now we're adding to the Blackman the collider, for example physics collider, okay, box collider, and also in physics we're adding rigid body. We don't need to have gravity, its kinematic is enough, and also we can a little bit change the size, oh no, something like this, it's enough. Okay, let's to test it in the editor. We want to see what will happen for triggers. Okay, as you can see, when I move it and put my character in here, it says trigger 3 says that Blackman is here. Trigger 4, trigger 5. It works well. Okay. Now we need to make a system to manage all the triggers and have a connection in the multiplayer to the another users. For example, we need to have connection between this cube in user 1 device and this cube in user 2 device, and says okay, user 1 cube said okay, Blackman is on my trigger 1, so put the Blackman on your trigger 1, something like this. Red cube said okay, user 2, Blackman is here, so put your Blackman is here. With this method we have a specific positioning system and without any connection with 000 of Unity and another positioning as a default of Unity. Okay, now let's to make it, we call this system, it's called set data system. Okay, let's wait for compiling this. Alright, let's open in here. We need to add some libraries. It's called using Photon .pon and also Unity Engine.ui. Perhaps we will need it. It is very necessary. Okay. At first we need to define some variables. It's called private Photon view. The Photon view is the default component in Photon network to be able to connect and stream data between two same objects in two different devices. We call it the underline Photon view. Okay, and also public game object trigger pose. We want to make a list of trigger pose and manage them and use their position, and also rename them and add the ID automatically. The list of triggers for movement and add ID automatically. Alright, the next one is public game object player. We need to add our player automatically in here. For example, okay, in here it will be equal black man, and public float player movement time. It is for when player wants to move by this script, what is the speed of it will be speed of lap for smooth movement. Okay, and also public int ID and public float distance. It is the distance between player and center of trigger object. It helps us for management the LERP method. For manage the LERP process, and also internal boolean pose activator equal false. Okay, let's to make the void, it's called awake. At first we need to put the variable in here, and we say okay, get component photon view, alright, and next we need to set the ID for each trigger pose in the list. So we define 4 in here, and we say okay, trigger pose dot length I plus plus. Okay, trigger pose ID dot get component we say pose trigger system that ID equal I. Oh, I forgot this one, sorry. Okay, the next one is I dot name equal at first we remove the name, then we rename it with the new one, trigger plus I. Okay, it is for our awake system. Make sure for here, I don't forget here, make sure that your object needs to have Photon view component. Okay, and in here we call start, void start, and we say let's start our process. At first we need to make a system to send a message between two same objects in two different devices. We call it check current pose. We say public void check current position, and in here we need to have two different variables. First, integer variable for target ID, where am I exactly. It is the ID of that trigger position, and also the next one is string for obj name, for that object we talk about which player exactly. And also in here we say okay, dot RPC, it is the default component and default void for sending a string message between two users in multiplayer. And we say RPC underline pose RPC target dot all. I means all users. Now call the target ID and obj name. Okay, what is the RPC pose? In here we need to define it as a RPC family, pun RPC, and private void RPC pose in here, and exactly the same variables in here we have defined it. We have to define with the same name and same types in here exactly. Here for sending the message, and here for receive the message. For example, ID is the current ID equal target ID, and also game object, we create a new object in here and we call it dot find obj name. For example, in here we say okay, Blackman is in the trigger 5, and RPC pose received this message. It says okay, let's find the Blackman object, then try to put in the position of target ID. We have defined it in here, and we say it is the new position of Blackman. First we say player equal obj. That things we have defined it in here. Okay. Until now we have sending and receiving the message as a string in the multiplayer. Now it's time to set the position of our character. We need to define a new void. It's called update, private void update, and we say okay, if pose activator equal true. I will explain you what is the job of this part after I will define this part for you. Okay, we say if trigger pose that id is not equal null, to be sure all the objects are inside of the list. We need to make sure about it to don't have any conflict or mistake in our system. And also player needs to be exist, so it don't be equal null. So let's to create make a distance in here, vector 3 dot distance between player dot transform dot position and trigger pose dot id dot transform dot position. Okay, now if distance is more than 0.1, it means it is far than the 0.1 meter of object of that trigger pose. So try to lerp and smoothly movement the player to that target trigger pose. Player dot transform dot position equal vector 3 dot lerp. So what is the object? Which one exactly? Player dot transform dot position, and the target is trigger pose id dot transform dot position. Sorry, and the lerping time is equal player movement time, and I need to add the time that delta time to be very smoothly. And with for understanding better, we can create print message in here, lerping. That's it. Okay, the job of pose activator is this void update try to work exactly the first frame of gameplay, but at the first frame of our gameplay we don't have any player in the scene because Photon network try to connect to the server and create instantiate a new character in the scene. It takes time about 4.5 seconds to do that. So we say at the first time, at the first of the level launch, scene launch, the pose activator is equal false to manage the update void doesn't work properly. So we say okay, let's to active this variable after to be sure the Photon network made a new character in the scene. So we say okay, avoid start pose set we copy in here, then we call the invoke and call this function and we say 4.2. okay, perfect. Now our positioning system will works perfectly. Okay, we need to add something in here. It's time to call this function check current position from the pose trigger system. It's called okay, keep it. We need to add a new variable. It's called public set data system set data. Okay, let's to add set data dot check current pose, the id equal obj.name. oh sorry, we need to add comma in here. Perfect. So however, we can, for better understanding, we can see the message received in here. For example, target ID plus obj name. Okay, and in here we can add a system for better management to don't have any confliction. In here we say okay, if the obj dot get component photon view, we need to add pawn using in here something like that to be able to work on it. Perfect. Photon view in here that is mine equal true. This part says okay, when you can call the check current pose when that character, that player is inside of your scene, not they are client. When you are player, for example, let's go to the scene. Okay, it's compiling. For example, black character is the player of user 1, but he is the another character is for user 2. In fact, in user 2 he is not player, so the trigger must be doesn't work for him. So it need to works only when we want to call it in user 1 device to make sure it doesn't have any confliction. Okay, in here we need to add our set data system to our cube, or that object we want to show in AR. For example, the red cube is that object we want to add our AR session in model red cube 1 in here, for example. So the red cube 1, put the set data. We don't need to have box collider in here. Okay, all the trigger pose in here, we need to add them. Pose trigger. Okay, perfect. 225. Okay, now we don't need to rename them manually. It will be automatically by our script. Okay, click on all of them and select them. So set the red cube 1 as a set data in here. Now it's ready to use. We don't need them. Okay, let's to see in the editor what will happen for pose triggers. As you can see, trigger 0, trigger 1, trigger 2, it works perfectly. Okay, now let's to see what will happen for receiving message. If I put the character in one of the triggers, we need to see the receiving message in here. Okay, where is my character? However, we need to add some things in here. The red cube must be has photon view. Okay, and make sure it has the manually. Oh, no need to has it. Okay, get back to the auto find all. And also for here we need to take the message for our test. After we will return to the active mode. Okay, let's to test it. It has connected. Now it's ready to use. Okay, as you can see, it is exactly that things we talked about. The ID 187 says Black Man Y1 is here. It works well. That's it. If we have the multiplayer system and the user 1 connected to the user 2, for example something like this, when we move the black man in here, it will moves in here automatically. For example, right now black man is inside of trigger 187, it will be moved to 187 automatically. Let's to test it in the real space. I will export an APK from this scene, and we will see what will happen in the editor. I will connect my phone to the PC and I will test it. But before this test, we need to talk about how we can set the position of our camera to the position of our character. For example, right now our character in multiplayer is this one, character 13. However, it is empty. We need to set our character, because right now it is moving by joystick, mobile joystick in the scene, and it is not moving by our movement in real space. We need to set the position of our camera in the 3D space to the position of our character in the multiplayer, so we can move it in real space, and also the character in the multiplayer follow us. Then we can hit the trigger and move the our character moves for other users. Okay, let's go to the next step.